It is that time of year, which means it's time for Boys on Film to talk about some of their favourite Christmas movies. But in this episode, not just Christmas films, but Christmas horror films. So we are fabulously, frighteningly festive. You guys looking more festive than me. I'm just black in my usual black attire. Hello to Matt. Hello to Paul. My name is Phil. Let's discuss Christmas horror films. Now, guys, we got a long list of films. Matt, I think you probably win the award for the most enthusiastic when it comes to picking out Christmas films. You sent an email with a really long list of Christmas films. I probably came up with 4 or 5 that I'm familiar with, or that I really like, that I enthuse about.
Yeah, I think our list might overlap a little bit for the best, and maybe the worst too.
Paul, what's your list like? Is it a long list?
No.
It's not. Just because there's a lot of dodgy ones.
There's also quite a few that I probably haven't seen, but there's a good 5 or 6 that I think are worth watching.
Okay, fabulous. Do you want to start with one? Do you want to pick out one? It could be good or bad, doesn't matter.
Yeah, one that I actually watched this weekend is Christmas Evil from 1980. Have either of you seen that?
I reckon Matt's seen it. Oh, really? Okay,
No,
American, right?
I've seen New Year's Evil, but not Christmas Evil.
Oh, there's a New Year's Evil.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
Also early 80s.
It's about a guy who works in a toy factory, and he kind of is quite disgruntled that the factory are making kind of like cheap toys, and he thinks they should make really good toys for children. And he also spies on all the children in the neighborhood and kind of keeps a list of their like good and bad behavior to kind of give them presents and stuff.
Because that's creepy, right? I mean, that's kind of weird.
It relates to a childhood incident involving a Santa. So he's kind of obsessed with Santa, and so he's kind of following these values. It was quite sweet, but then it turns into a slasher.
It reminds me of Silent Night, Deadly Night, which I'm sure you two are probably going to talk about as well. Not because I love this film, it's on my list, but because somebody gave me a DVD of it a couple of years ago, and it's from 1984. It's about a little kid who sees his parents being killed, and then later, as he's older, I think he goes to be looked after by nuns, and then he leaves the orphanage and becomes a killer Santa.
That was a big deal in America because that's like a no-no to destroy something as
sacred,
cherished as Santa Claus. So I think it was banned from a lot of theaters, and which only increased its appeal and increased its attention, and became a big hit once it got on video cassette, whatever, probably a year later. It became a big cult kind of thing. And they made a bunch of sequels. I think they made at least 4 sequels, and I'm sure, I haven't seen any of them. I'm sure they're even worse than the original.
I've seen the second one. I actually watched it also on the weekend when I was doing a bit of revision for this show. The sequel, I think at the time, was heavily criticised because it's about the brother of the main character who is now in prison and is being interviewed about some murders that he's done since. But he's interviewed by a psychologist who asks him to tell the story, and he basically tells the whole story right from the beginning, and they use quite a lot of footage from the original film. Apparently it's like half an hour's worth, so it's kind of like,
wow,
like they've probably only shot 50 minutes worth of new stuff. But the guy who plays the lead character is like a really hammy actor, and once it gets into its stride of the killings and stuff, it's kind of quite silly. So I think it's got a bit of a cult status. But yeah, I've not ventured any further into the Silent Night, Deadly Nights.
It's kind of interesting because there is a lot of backstory there. So there is quite a lot of story, which is unusual when you think about, a lot of horror films, particularly Christmas horror films, don't really have that much story. I mean, that one we saw recently, Paul, was Christmas Bloody Christmas. I mean, that story wasn't exactly that intricate.
There's probably different categories of Christmas horror films. I think there's ones where it's about some horror that happens to take place at Christmas, and then there's ones where the Christmas mythology and Christmas iconography is part of it. So stuff like Krampus and Jack Frost. So like Black Christmas, for example, that's a slasher, and it just happens that that's the period it takes over, is when it's a load of dorm girls hanging around over the festive holidays. But Black Christmas could be Black Thanksgiving. If I recall, there's nothing really like plot-wise that it has to be at Christmas.
So Matt, give us a turkey. Give us a Christmas horror turkey.
Paul just mentioned Black Christmas, which we can talk about later if you want to go in depth of the original, which is fantastic. But there's also the remakes. The two remakes, for some reason, two within about 12 years of each other. 2006 and 2019, I think they were out. They're just terrible. Like Paul said, Christmas time, but really has nothing to do with Christmas. It could be any time, even more so than the original. Maybe I just like it so much because it's such a terrible version of the original that it just can't match. It could never match the quality of the original.
I didn't see the most recent one, but I know that the 2006 one, there seemed to be that spate of kind of remakes. Like there was like a Prom Night remake of the sort of more teen type slashers that were really toned down the gore, and we were like, you know, I think the remake of Prom Night was even like a rated 15 here, which in the UK isn't the, you know, most horrors are that, and they just make them quite bland and almost like more like on this sort of like Gossip Girl type thing.
They did that with the Black Christmas remakes, where it was very like, especially the newer one, it was very girl power. We're gonna which is great theoretically, but it was filmed, it's like too brightly lit, too full of humor and quips and stuff. It doesn't have any kind of like darkness that the original has.
Sounds like the new Halloween franchise. The new Halloween as much as I love them, they're very glossy, aren't they? I mean, they don't really capture the vibe necessarily of the 70s.
Probably more the sort of like H20 type Halloween.
Yes.
That's probably comparable.
Resurrection.
But obviously, the original Black Christmas has like a boozy Margot Kidder in it, doesn't it? Which is like amazing. Like,
that's one of the reasons why I love it.
Yeah.
And also because it is kind of, it's weird to say it because it's so macabre, but it is macabre. But it starts off obviously with the Dawn Girls. You kind of get that cozy Christmassy feeling because they're obviously all drinking, they're boozing up, and then it obviously turns nasty. But there's something about that house, because obviously the director, I think he picked that house out from. There was somebody living there, I think, and I think they just rented it out for a few weeks while they could make the movie. But it feels really authentic, even though it is kind of over the top in some ways. But yeah, it's definitely of its time.
The house is that's almost a character in itself, because most of the film takes place at the house, and it's very dark and like dark wood and not very well lit and just old fashioned. It seems like it's from 100 years ago or something like that. And that really adds a lot of character to it that I don't think the newer ones have at all.
Yeah, definitely. It gives off the impression that it smells musty and mouldy. You could just imagine
cigarette smoke and like whiskey and
cheap perfume.
Give us a good one, Paul. Give us a Christmas movie that really sticks out, that you revisit.
I recently, for the first time, watched Krampus, and I actually thought that was pretty good.
I saw that at the cinema, and I was a little bit underwhelmed, but there's so much of it I love, though, because it's really atmospheric.
I think that the weird thing about it, I think tonally, it's a bit like, I think it's one of those films that's stuck in between, is it like a kid's film, or is it like an adult satire horror? And it kind of works on various different levels.
And Toni Collette's there, which is always a bonus.
Yeah, I mean, Toni Collette and Adam Scott's brilliant, but also they, in terms of like one of those films that's about Christmas, they do this whole thing where all the like, you know, the Krampus, for a long time you don't really see what he looks like, and he's this kind of version of Santa, but there's all these like demonic toys and like a jack-in-the-box with big teeth and like gingerbread men that come to life, and it's all like quite horrible but kind of rooted in all that in stuff that's Christmassy. And I think for kids it would actually be really scary, like really quite disturbing. And the end is quite downbeat as well. If you want like a Hollywood type Christmas horror rather than a sort of grainy late 70s slasher type horror, I'd say that's probably quite a good one.
And the snow setting is amazing, because when they go out and they film outside, I don't know how genuine a lot of that snow, I'm guessing that it wasn't, but it does feel like it's just a proper blizzard.
It also has a thing where the grandmother, who's German, is kind of telling a story about when she was a kid and they experienced like a similar thing, the legend of the Krampus, which almost has sort of World War II Nazi type overtones as well. So it's got that sort of like folk tale part to it. But so,
Yeah,
I think
definitely. Much like The Fog, which had the ghost story at the beginning of John Carpenter's The Fog, which is always a crucial part of that film, I think. I think it really plays a part in the rest. This is probably going to be an obvious one, but my other choice would be... I'm going to show you that. I mean, animation, I suppose, is not everyone's thing, but I loved this film when it first came out, and it's something that I never get tired of seeing. Whenever you see it on TV, it's just such a joy to watch over Christmas, and well, any time of the year, I guess, but particularly Christmas. But a lot of people obviously think that it's Tim Burton that directed it. I think he was just producer, wasn't he? But it's Henry Selick who did Coraline, which is also brilliant.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's funny because I've actually only seen that movie once. I know I should probably see it more than once.
Wow.
I saw it in the theater when it came out.
Yeah.
And I think it came out, at least in America, it came out around Halloween. So people thought it was supposed to be more about a Halloween movie. I mean, obviously it's like scary monsters, like Tim Burton style, but it revolves around Christmas and not really Halloween.
Yeah,
right?
It's so good. And I think Danny Elfman, who does a lot of, obviously, score composing, he sings in it as well, doesn't he sing?
Yeah, he's the main character, right?
Yeah.
What's this? I wouldn't necessarily say The Nightmare Before Christmas is quite horror, but I do think if people like horror and hate schmaltzy Christmas movies but still want something Christmassy at Christmas, it's a great choice.
You look at the pictures and stills and in magazines and books, and it has got definitely that Tim Burton vibe, which obviously is horror themed, I guess.
I just think maybe because it's animated, it doesn't seem to have the stakes, don't seem as high as it's a bit more silly maybe, but
maybe.
Yeah,
but I think animation is creepy though, don't you? I think it can be creepy.
Yeah.
A movie, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's a movie called Rare Exports. Have you seen that?
I have seen it. I saw it a couple of years ago. Brilliant.
Is it Finnish or Norwegian or?
Yeah, it's Finnish, and it came out, I think, 2010. And it was originally short films that came out even earlier than that they had enough interest to make it into a feature-length film. And that's kind of like, it's a little bit like Krampus and Nightmare Before Christmas, where it's kind of a kids movie, but not really. It's a little dark for anyone under the age of 10, probably. But it's still kind of a fun, because one of the lead characters is maybe a 10-year-old boy and his father, and so it has like the entryway for a kid to kind of focus on this kid being your view of the story, but it also has an action element and horror and kind of dark comedy as well. And it's really such a fantastic movie, and something that I think a lot of people just kind of stumbled upon because it kind of was a big cult film that
I stumbled across.
Eventually people are like, oh, have you heard of this movie? Yeah, and people just kind of like me, just kind of stumbled upon this from hearing word of mouth from someone. And it's such a fantastic movie. It just looks really cool. It's really original seeming. It's funny, but it's also really creepy and kind of scary, but still being accessible maybe to like older children.
It wraps itself up really well, like the way the story ties up is like it's kind of a bit unexpected and has quite a sweet ending, I guess, for that type of genre of film. Wasn't it originally meant to be that it was going to be like Rare Exports was like going to be a series?
I'm surprised they never did a sequel to it because it's been over 10 years. And I guess the short original film had a sequel to it. And I think they combined those two short films into this feature-length film.
I think Christmas horror films, going back to what you said, Paul, about A Nightmare Before Christmas, because I think there aren't that many Christmas horror films. There's some really bad ones, but there aren't that many kind of acclaimed Christmas horror films. Or they're a mixture of kind of kids' films and horror films, but not, quite mild. So there's nothing really violent or aggressive, and there's nothing... And unless you go the other way and you go for something that's like an indie favourite, like Black Christmas or something. But I think with Rare Exports, it kind of had a balance of all of that. Well, not so much the kids' film, because it was quite an adult film. It's quite mature, but I thought it was really refreshing. Like you said, Matt, it's original. It felt like a really original idea.
What I really think is lacking is a good Christmas ghost story. We've talked about slashers, and then you've got these ones that are about more they're sort of like, you know, stuff like Rare Exports and Krampus are more like mythological or kind of, you know, or sort of monster movies really. But I just think something that's like chilling in that way. I can't really think of anything Christmassy. Interestingly, I recall, and you might not have seen this, Matt, because the context of when it was screened, but in the sort of mid to late 80s, there was a TV adaptation of The Woman in Black, which was screened on Christmas Eve here. It's kind of become a bit of a cult thing because there was two very, very terrifying, spooky moments in it. It only came out on DVD for the first time about 4 years ago or something, and they were kind of like... I
bought it last year on Blu-ray.
Yeah.
I think Matt would love it.
I was probably maybe 13 when I saw it. Everyone has all these like... They associate it with Christmas, and it's like this sort of like... I think everyone said like, why did ITV... I think it was ITV, not BBC. Why did ITV put that as their Christmas programming? But it definitely stuck with you, and I do think I think something chilling at Christmas is maybe what you want.
That's kind of unheard of in America. I don't know anyone who's seen that movie before, and I have to check it out now, definitely.
I mean, obviously there was the remake of The Woman in Black with Daniel Radcliffe.
Yeah.
That was like...
Oh, it was I saw that, actually.
Which was okay, but it was just jump scare. It was like a house, almost like a house for no reason, full of wind-up mechanical toys, just so they would suddenly start making noise to make you jump. And obviously, and also in London, it's a very long-running stage production. I think this one was a bit of a sort of like very much a sort of like British TV period drama approach on it, and it was really spooky and really disturbing, and had a really disturbing ending as well.
And when you see the figure, when you see the Woman in Black, it is terrifying because she's at a distance.
You don't see her very often.
You don't, but the face is really white. It's almost like she is wearing a mask because you can't see the detail because she's so far away. But there's loads of mist, and it feels very British, doesn't it?
Christmas spookiness, I think that's lacking. It'd be interesting to know if any of the viewers have any ideas.
I've got a really good box set, the BBC release, which isn't films, it's TV shows, but it's the BBC Ghost Stories box
Ghost
set.
Stories, yeah.
And there's loads of them. There's some really good ones, not so many good ones, but that's really good if you like the kind of creepy ghost stories at Christmas.
Do you guys have any horror movies that, like Paul was saying earlier, that they happen to take place during Christmas, but they're not really Christmas themed, that are favorites of yours?
I mean, probably the one that what I'd probably say is top of all our lists, and I don't know if I want to say it, I feel bad if I'm saying it prematurely, is Gremlins, in a way.
It's on my list. Is it a horror film, though?
That's, yeah.
Comedy.
That's probably the best. I mean, I suppose it is. There is something about the setting of Christmas makes it more what's going on, kind of more crazy.
I'm thinking of one that I put on my list that is very tangentially Christmas, because it does take place on Christmas Eve, but it really has nothing to do with Christmas, is the French movie Inside. Have you seen that?
I was going to see that the other day, but I've had such a mad week I didn't get around to seeing it, but I've been wanting to see it for so long. Beatrice Dahl, isn't it?
Have you not seen it before?
I've never seen it.
Phil, have you not seen it?
My friend Claire, who's massively into horror as well, she said it's one of the most disturbing films she's seen. And yeah,
it's really scary.
I need to see it because I love the trailer when I first saw the trailer. But
yeah, Paul, have you seen it?
No. What's the premise?
The premise is a woman. She's a widow, and her husband died in a car crash like a couple of months before that. So she's pregnant, and she's about to have the baby. So the doctor's like, I think you might have it on Christmas. So we'll schedule you to come in just to have it delivered. Like, we'll set the date. And so she spends Christmas Eve at her house by herself, thinking that she'll go, like her mother or someone will pick her up in the morning and then they'll go to the hospital to have it delivered. And so she spends the night by herself, and it's kind of a home invasion story. I don't want to give too much of it away, but it's a single person who wants to get into the house that may or may not have some connection to her life that she doesn't know about. And it's super gory, super brutal, really scary. This is one of those movies where I'm not really scared that much by horror movies, but it was a movie I didn't know anything about. and I went to see it and I was terrified, which happens about once every 10 years with a good horror movie. It's just really brutal. It's gory. And the woman's like 9 months pregnant. So you have this kind of like natural protection vibe of this woman, and she's being attacked and having to fight for her life. It's great. I'd be surprised if you saw it and you didn't like it. Or you didn't
I
think
so
it
want to
was
see
good.
it. But you talking of French horror, I mean, Martyrs for me was very disturbing. The original of that, I thought. I mean, obviously not Christmas related.
I actually
but
haven't seen that yet.
wow.
And-
Okay, that's. I mean, that the final part of the film is just. I mean, it's almost like two parts of the film. First, very action, but there's obviously a lot of torture in the middle, and then at the end there's again torture, but it's kind of. I mean, it's very cinematic, but the last shot is just the worst that you could ever imagine. Without going into detail, obviously, but yeah, do see it because I mean, it's amazing, but it's brutal, it's horrible.
Yeah, Inside's not. Well, I wouldn't say it's not torture, but it's not like someone's being tied up and then tortured. It's like not an action, but it's like a chase kind of thing through a house.
Psychologically, like the threat and psychological.
Yeah, psychological, physical threat. It's very slashery. And there are other characters that kind of talk about Christmas, but it's very like in the background. It could be set in any other day of the year, but it makes it kind of strange because why would this woman be spending Christmas by herself? Like, why weren't her parents like come over and say like, just come over to our house or we'll come over here? And so it just sets up a very strange kind of setup, but
it sounds terrifying.
I'm really curious to know what you I'm really curious to know what you think about it.
I'll save it for Christmas Eve.
Get into the Christmas spirit.
Yeah, they did a really bad American remake of it maybe 5 years ago. That's terrible.
Yeah, why bother? So should we talk about the cream on the cake? I mean, I'm guessing it's probably all our favourites. Is it? Would it be? I don't know, Paul. Gremlins, yeah, we briefly touched on that. Do you want to talk about that in detail?
Yeah, I mean, I think Gremlins, I'd say it's definitely a horror. It's like a monster horror. There's a really nice bit where one of the old guys is talking about the war and these like gremlins in the machine, and there's a sense of like nastiness and whatever. And obviously, it's set at Christmas, and so you just get this like havoc wreaked over the festive season. That's really, I guess, because of the way the gremlins present themselves and their naughtiness, it's quite funny and it's quite gleeful. But actually, some of it's really dark, and some of the kills are really dark. And
the microwave and the liquidizer.
I
always remember.
Even when the nasty old lady goes flying up on the standard stair lift and out of the window, she lands in the bin head first. There's that really like long monologue by Phoebe Cates where she describes why she doesn't like Christmas. Which
I'd forgotten about that.
I won't say what it is in case anybody hasn't seen Gremlins, but there's like a really sad reason that she doesn't like Christmas. I guess is to Christmas what Die Hard is to the action movie of Christmas. It embraces elements of the festive season, but it doesn't get too distracted by that to still be a good genre film, I'd say.
Yeah, and it does mix comedy and horror really well, because those two genres wouldn't normally go together unless you know what you're doing, I think. Obviously, Joe Dante knew exactly what he was doing. And what a massive hit as well. You think it cost $11 million to make, and it made over 200 million. I mean, at the box office, it was a huge hit, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Did you? I don't know what it was like in England, but in America, it was released in the summertime. I think in the middle of summer.
I can't remember actually
really
when it came out here.
I can't remember. I mean,
I don't remember it being at Christmas, so it must have been.
Yeah, I mean, I think back then the sort of like, I think nowadays what is the blockbuster season isn't really such a thing anymore. It extends from like May to September, and you get a Marvel movie every other week. But I think back then, that kind of film, I would imagine it would have been this, particularly if it was released in the States in the summer, probably the same here, unless it was like a little bit delayed. Maybe stuff does come here a bit later. But yeah, I don't remember it being a wintry film when it was out. No,
I don't either. What an amazing film, though. I mean, it's so much fun, isn't it? It's a proper popcorn horror comedy pleaser, I think.
Yeah, and it was in the US. It was released as I don't think it was PG. In the US rating, PG and PG-13 are kind of what, like 15.
15.
In the UK, is that it? Do you have something less than 15?
They changed them, but I think at that point they would have had U, which is everything, then PG, which is like meant to be you need to be accompanied by parents, but actually it's just guidance to the parents. And then there was 15 and 18, and I think since then they put in a 12 rating and then like a 12A, but it probably would have been maybe a 15, I would think.
Yeah, I think it was.
What's the like old couple in the house? Isn't there something where
they get disemboweled? I'm kidding.
They get disemboweled, yeah. And I also remember like a sort of Santa walking down the street and loads of them on top of him, and him kind of like sort of fighting them all off.
I've never actually seen, believe it or not, I love Gremlins, but I've never actually seen the sequel. And that's not a Christmas movie, is it?
I think it takes
place some other.
I think it's just as good. Maybe not as good as the first one.
It's really good, and it's really satirical as well. It has like, and I think isn't that they have that scene in the cinema? Yeah, and they have like a drag gremlin, and then they have one who they have it where one of them's on a talk show and is this like intellectual, and it's kind of set in the Trump Towers or something, isn't it? It's kind of like she's working
accompanying, right?
Yeah, accompanying. So I think it's quite. I think it's probably more satirical than the original. Really good fun. Really good fun.
Are we going to go for the same film then, which I think we're all going to be in agreement on as being probably the ultimate Christmas horror film? Do you think?
I think so.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do.
Black Christmas? Do you think it could be the ultimate?
I think it depends I think if you're looking for a slasher, definitely. I think if you're looking for like a monster movie or something a bit more action-packed, then Gremlins, if you can agree that it's a horror movie.
That's an all-rounder, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I think Paul said it earlier in the episode, where there was a monster segment, the tangentially Christmas segment, and then like slashery segment, and maybe very Christmas mythology legend kind of version. And definitely, for the slasher.
So Black Christmas 1974 probably for the downbeat, moody vibe, and Gremlins for the fun.
As a runner-up in the slasher side, I think Silent Night, Deadly Night's pretty good. Or Christmas Evil, as I was talking about earlier. Although Christmas Evil, I think there's not a killing until like 40 minutes into it.
That's on my list as well, and I'm definitely watching Inside over Christmas. Fun. Seeing a pregnant woman being tortured.
Whatever. They're all a lot more entertaining than It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah, well, I love that film, though. It's one of my favourites. The eye roll from Paul there.
True Christmas horror is Love Actually.
Ah, yes. I would agree with you on that.
I don't know what the response to that movie was in the States, but obviously, at that time, those kind of Richard Curtis working title Hugh Grant films were really big here. And it was hyped, and I think it critically wasn't very well received, and it's not a great movie, but it's seemed to got this status now as like a cult Christmas movie, and they do like screenings of it at the Albert Hall with the live orchestra doing the soundtrack, and it's like, oh my god,
that's my worst nightmare.
It's the same here. It was kind of a moderate hit, but then it became kind of a cult thing, and it's become a classic for people. Which I've seen it. I don't get it.
It's so cheesy.
I think people get into. I think a weird, and it's a successful marketing, but I think people start to think of like, oh my god, it's Christmas, got to watch Love Actually, and I don't think it had that impact at the time. I think people just get into this whole fervor about remembering or remembering something in a certain way, and it's like
it's The Wizard of Oz for me. I mean, that's probably the ultimate Christmas film for me because I've seen it so many times.
Really? Yeah, as in a film you would watch at Christmas, definitely.
Yeah. So good, so good. A masterpiece, I think.
Oh yeah. What about The Sound of Music?
Yeah.
Well, The Sound of Music again. It would whenever there was like a a public holiday here in the UK, there would always be like The Sound of Music.
It's so long, isn't it? Like 5 hours or something. It feels
if it was
like
on one of
5
the
hours.
commercial channels, like ITV, where they had ad breaks, it was like, wow, that's like a really long time.
Well, it's been fun as always, boys. I want to wish you a very Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to everybody watching. What are you guys doing over Christmas? How are you celebrating? Watching films, watching horror films?
Partially.
I'm going to spend some time going to my mum's for a few days. His family will be there, so I'm sure we'll watch some movies. I don't know how many of them will be horror.
Try your best, though, Paul.
A few quiet days in London, just not being at work. So yeah, it'd be nice.
Slide those horror movies in just when they're not
Exactly.
looking, when they're not expecting it, and just leave it on, leave it running.
Terrorise my mum with Inside on
Yes.
Christmas Eve.
Yeah, slide it inside into the playlist next to Sound of Music.
Yeah. Okay, our job isn't done until they every year have a screening of Inside at the Royal Albert Hall every Christmas with the live
Sing along.
orchestra in the
Yeah.
and then we've successfully made it a Christmas film.
I shall look forward to that happening. Brilliant. Merry Christmas, everyone, and thank you for watching. And thanks, guys. We'll do this again soon, no doubt. So don't forget to
Thank you.
subscribe. See you later.
Thank you. Bye.